Take a good deep breath with me. Take just a moment to center yourself here. Sunlight streaming through your windows. All the warm hellos and lovely conversations you've been able to have this morning. Beautiful music that lifts and inspires. The energy of the children. The relationships you share with those around you. Yes, take a good, deep breath. And know that that is the breath of God in you. Dear friends here at First Church Berkeley, good morning. Today's a good day, and I'm delighted to be able to spend it with you. Some of you know me. For those of you who don't, my name is Marc Rieke. My husband and I have our home in Tacoma, Washington, up the coast a ways. We're right near the Narrows Bridge, if you know where that is. Our home congregation there is Bethany Presbyterian Church, a church very much like First Church Berkeley. So even though I'm away from them, it feels very much at home for me to be here with you. I'm here because I'm serving you on behalf of your Capital Fund campaign this spring, Build, Gather, Grow. I hope you've heard those words by now. Build, gather, grow. It's a campaign that seeks to fund a portion of the building process that I think is already underway here, a building that will house your church offices, large and small assembly areas, a kitchen, classrooms, a building in which to gather and grow. I was blessed to serve you this past fall in feasibility study work for that project, and I'm thankful for the continued partnership this spring. My original calling in life, you should know, was as a public educator and school administrator. So that means I'm going to give you homework later on. I just don't want you to be surprised or shocked by that, though I have to admit, I'm not at all sure how I'm going to follow the teaching of Connor. That's a high bar you've set for me. For the past 21 years, it's been my blessing to serve Christian congregations just like you here throughout the country, and it amazes me that no matter where I go, I always learn something. A little different way of looking at something, or a thought I hadn't had before. For example, I was with the church recently, and they hosted a lovely luncheon buffet, and as their guest, they invited me to go first in the line. So I picked up my tray, and I moved to the table of food, and there first on the table was a large basket of apples. And there was a little sign on the top of the apples that said, "Please take only one. God is watching." So I took one apple, put it on my tray, and moved down the line. I got to the end of the line, and there was a large platter of cookies, and the man behind me nudged me, and he said, "Go on, take as many of those as you like." And I said, "Well, they do look really good, but I'm remembering that sign at the top of the table that said, 'Please take only one, God is watching.'" And the man insisted. He said, "No, really, take as many as you like. I guarantee you God will be too busy watching the apples to even notice." Well, there was a thought I hadn't had before, a different perspective. And that's what I hope to be for you today. A little different voice, perhaps, a different perspective, maybe a way to think about things a little differently. And I pray that it's helpful to you as you journey this spring on your capital campaign effort. Remember, it's your faith. Years ago, when I was just out of college, the pastor of the congregation I was a part of then used to say those words to me frequently. Whenever I was pondering something, a decision in my personal or professional life, or perhaps about how I would participate in church, he would turn to me and he would say, "Remember, it's your faith." At one level, I always thought it sounded like he was just saying, "Do whatever you think is best." But on another level, I know he was encouraging me to look through the lens of my faith life, to consider what I believed, and to use that as I discerned my way. I admit I did not always do that, and I didn't always get it. In those days in particular, I was much more headstrong, perhaps even arrogant at times. I was much more likely to lean into my own sense of self-reliance and capacity than make any deeper consideration of faith. You may recall in the gospel text, the disciples hear a lot about faith from Jesus. And in Luke chapter 17, at one point, they turn to Jesus and they say, "Lord, increase our faith." And Jesus responds to them by saying, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to that mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." Now, to set that little snippet of Scripture in context, it comes on the heels of all of these teachings that Jesus has been doing with his disciples about what it means to be his follower. So many hard teachings that at one point the disciples seem to just throw up their hands in exasperation and say, "Help us, Lord, increase our faith." And Jesus, perhaps in equal exasperation, says, "Don't you get it? If you exercised even a little bit of the capacity you have for faith, incredible things would happen if you acted on that bit of faith as small as a mustard seed." Now, the analogy of the mustard seed was no accident on Jesus' part. If you've ever seen a mustard seed, you know it's incredibly tiny. If I held one up here in my hand, you wouldn't even be able to see it. And yet, when you plant it, it grows into this incredible bush, 20 feet high with a 20-foot spread. The analogy is one of infinite possibility, infinite potential, infinite reach, all contained within the finite miniature of a tiny seed. Remember, it's your faith. Well, a little bit after that text in the book of Luke, we encounter the text that you heard Pastor Molly read just a little bit ago from Luke 21. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. "Truly I tell you," Jesus said, "this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, in her poverty, has put in all she has to live on." We recognize that story as what we oftentimes refer to as the widow's offering or the widow's mite, M-I-T-E, meaning a very small amount. The setting of the story is familiar enough to us. They're in church, and it's the church offering. And it's a rather public affair, and you can see what people are donating, all right? And so Jesus notes the rich making their gifts, but he chooses to focus on the poor widow and her gift. 2 things immediately stand out about Jesus' observation. The first is that she was a widow. In contrast to the mention of the rich, who presumably were there with other people, had social affiliations and connections, the widow, we're given to understand, is a solitary figure. She is alone. And while we may have compassion for a widow woman in our time, we must remember that in Jesus' day, widows had a particularly difficult plight. They had no economic or social standing, And unless they had children to care for them, or could return to their father's household, or could possibly remarry, they had absolutely nothing. There was no Social Security. There was no life insurance. There was no welfare safety net on which they could rely. And the widow's offering is also of particular note, 2 very small copper coins. That's where the mite, M-I-T-E, comes in. So the coins are understood to be of the smallest denomination. So here we have a solitary individual of low social standing making an offering of the smallest amount. And yet, Jesus surprises us with the saying, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she has to live on." Aha! A part of Jesus' point in telling us this story comes clear to us now. The revelation that the widow didn't just make a small offering because she didn't have much, but that in fact she put in everything she had to live on, not only underscores the reality of her abject poverty, but the incredible nature of her action in giving. Now, both those who were well off, as well as the poor widow, went to the temple. Why do you suppose they came? Well, the text seems to suggest that those who were wealthier perhaps came out of ritual habit or obligation, or it was the social place to be, and they made their gifts easily, perhaps even thoughtlessly, and then went out to brunch afterwards and went on with their day. I wonder, though, why did the widow come? She, of all people, would have had a reason to stay away. Did she come also out of habit or obligation? Or did she perhaps, just perhaps, have nowhere else to turn? Or maybe she was looking for something she needed in her life. And why? Why did she feel compelled to make an offering at all? Again, she, of all people, would have had a reason not to. And don't you ever wonder why, with 2 coins, she didn't just put in 1 and save 1 back for herself? If she had any sense of her care and keeping, that's the action I think she would have taken. Perhaps her gift was obligation or resignation, but perhaps, just perhaps, her gift was fueled by a sense of faith, a sense that she needed to open herself up to whatever God had in store to her. What was the impetus for her gift, and what was the impact? We don't really know, but we can imagine. I'd like you to lay your hands on your wallet or pocketbook. If it's not handy, imagine it in your mind's eye. See what it looks like. This is my wallet. And in here is my identification, my driver's license, a couple of bank cards, a couple of credit cards. There's enough information in this wallet that someone who is crafty enough could essentially access all of my financial wealth, all I have to live on. Now I want you to imagine, just imagine, when the offering plate comes your way today, you take that wallet or that pocketbook and you place it in the offering plate. Just imagine. Just imagine giving all you have to live on. What would ever cause you to do something radical like that? How would that shift your thinking and acting? How would things be necessarily reordered in your life? What would you need? Who would you need? Where would you turn? Would that mean the end of your life? Or the beginning of a new chapter? Now let me be clear, no one is asking you to do that. And no one is going to ask you to do that. But I do ask that you imagine, just imagine what that would be like. Put yourself in the place of the poor widow. Because Jesus' words seem to commend the sacrificial nature of the widow. And most reflections on this text lift up just exactly that theme. Look how generous the widow was. See the sacrificial nature of her gift. And we get really uncomfortable with that word sacrifice because it sounds hard and not very much fun. It's helpful to remember that the word sacrifice and sacrificial has the same roots as the words sacred and holy. Sacred and holy. Giving in that way means to bless the gift in a way that's special and significant for the giver, a way that lifts up the donor and motivates us in our lives, a gift that brings compatibility and wholeness to who we are, what we have, and how we seek to be in this world. But the real act of significance to pay attention to in this text is the way in which the widow acted in faith, how she opened herself, how she let loose of some things and put herself entirely into God's loving care. You see, I think there's something powerful and transformative about giving ourselves permission to stretch beyond the bounds of what we usually do or the ways we typically think and act. When we loosen our grip just a little bit on some of those things that we feel we have to control, when we loosen our grip on our belief that it's all about us, relying on our own capacity, that's when we're looking through that lens of faith. When we test and stretch that faith, we are drawn more deeply into relationship with the God who created and sustains us, the one who gives us all of our time, all of our being, all of our resources. Living into that relationship is the beginning and end of Christian service and Christian giving. Now here at First Church Berkeley, you're building a new facility. It's a place that is graciously inviting to all people. It will be the location of events large and small in the life of families, in the life of the congregation, in the life of the church. It's a place where worship, spiritual education, and nurture will take place, where conferences and musical groups will be hosted, where community groups will meet, and where the neighbor in need will be served, where meals will be cooked and consumed, and where bodies, minds, and spirits will be revived, renewed, and transformed. Above and beyond your annual sustaining gifts to First Church, your regular offerings, you're going to be asked to make a special 3-year financial pledge to your capital campaign, Build, Gather, Grow, to help fund a small portion of that building. The goal you'll have is significant, but it's the kind of challenge that First Church has taken on in the past and been very successful at. And it's right-sized for you. You can do this because you are a people who have been blessed by God with gifts and skills and with the financial capacity to make it happen. First Church Berkeley has a special place in this community, a deep history, a deep presence. But this church home that you enjoy now was the future vision of people who went before you, people who saw this vision by faith, and now you have inherited it, and now it is your turn to create the future. So ask yourself the question, what value and impact does this church have in your lives? What place does this church have in this community? How have you been touched by God's love here? How has your life been transformed here? And what can you imagine happening in the years ahead? The things that will happen in and through this place. Well, here's the homework I promised you. Over the coming weeks, I want you to get involved. Come to one of the launch parties that Julie Greer and her team are organizing. Participate in the prayer event that Nicole and Derek are creating. Read the campaign publications that Jennifer Nixon and Lori Halsey are producing. Come celebrate at an incredible gala gathering that Cara and Rod are putting together. And consider serving in some small way as part of the campaign. Contact Sarah Woods, your campaign chair, or another member of the campaign leadership team. And on Commitment Sunday, May 14th, give thanks, celebrate, and make your financial commitments to build, gather, grow. Commitments that I hope will unlock in you a renewed sense of faith and a joy in the relationship that God keeps with you. Plant your mustard seed and see how the infinite power of possibility grows. Remember, it's your faith. Amen.